nice to be here. You have a beautiful library, and I'm really honored to be reading here. And thank you, Paul, for the invitation. I love meeting new community and kind of expanding my sense of the Bay Area. I tend to do most readings out of Oakland and San Francisco, but I'm very aware of Livermore and other cities around me, and so I'm thrilled that you have me here. I primarily published in poetry, but I also write essays. I like to say that I am having a torrid affair with the lyric essay, because I am. I really love lyric essays. And so I brought a part of a longer piece.
Excuse my ignorance, but what do you mean exactly by lyric essay as opposed to other types of essays?
Well, that's much debate, actually, about the lyric essay, which is probably to some degree why I like it so much. But the lyric essay is, I'm trying to think of the best way to define it, but my personal definition is that it is a hybrid, it's a hybrid form, and it's a combination of the music and the language play that you might find in poetry, but the weight and the facts that you will find in an essay. So it's a hybrid genre that I think in general hybridity is really popular in writing right now, because so many of us are trying to, or have tried to fit into a particular genre and never feeling completely like it gave us the room to be able to express what we were trying to express. So I feel like there's a lot of experimentation going on out there. Okay. One more minute. This is called Deforestation. One night, long ago, my mother took me into the woods to lose me. I understand languishing in old growth. At twilight, my tenderness opens to the path between the trees, the space between the sugar pines. How trees are cut into logs and stacked. What it is to wait to be made into something of use. I was 7 when my mother took my hand, said nothing that could be understood as language, and walked us from the campground into the backcountry. It is now understood that communication can take place outside of language. Trees have roots and nerve endings. The way that both trees and humans can release pheromones to signal a threat. Before we understood trees, we imagined them competitors with one another. Perhaps we saw them as a mirror. Trees grow in concentric circles, familial patterns, and message warnings to others that they might save themselves. Trees nurture other trees with their fallen trunks, divert nutrients and water to the more vulnerable. It takes a forest to form a canopy that protects the earth from the constant exposure of the sun. In our best moments, we are like trees. Forests still cover about 30% of the world, even as we remove areas the size of England each year. Some estimate that in 100 years, there will be no rainforests. Half of the world's rainforests have already been cleared. Deforestation is naturally occurring, human-induced, and an ongoing issue. It has been a war tactic to deprive the enemy. It is also said to happen accidentally due to overgrazing and wildfires. I understand what it is to be at the center of a terrible mistake. I know what it is to lose everything. My mother lost her mind in 1982. That's what they said. Lost. Like keys, a wallet, a pair of glasses. Women in Mexico are marrying trees. My mother was a marrying type. It is a rapturous response for a woman to marry a tree. My mother would have approved. My mother said, "You will be safer among the animals, among the trees." I have never married a human, but I would marry a tree. While in combat, American Army Commander Philip Jones Griffith said, "Trees are our enemy." Trees sometimes swallow war. Along the path, you may come across a tree that has folded an object into itself because a tree cannot move its roots, cannot deny what life has placed in its path. Adapho-ecotropism is the process where we incorporate foreign objects into our structure. Some trees have swallowed rifles, grenades, barbed wire fences. When Agent Orange was used in Vietnam, it killed trees too. Today, it is the mangroves keeping Ho Chi Minh City from joining the ocean. I understand the United States, even as I will never fully fathom it. In El Salvador, survivors of the Civil War have built a reconciliation forest, a tree for every person who was killed during the war. 72,000 trees to repopulate a mountain ridge. I understand that deforestation causes extinction. Trees were watching when Columbus discovered America. In the White Mountains of California, the Methuselah, a bristlecone pine, the oldest non-clonal tree in the world, gnarled and twisted, lives in a secret location for her protection. In 1964, her brother, Prometheus, almost as old as Methuselah, was accidentally felled by a scientist who failed to recognize him. I know what it is to be saved by a tree. There are trees I will never see again. I never saw my mother again after the night she took me into the forest. I understand there are some faces that I may never see again, and that we self-impose our own demise. I understand the dilemma of the Ouroboros, the lament of our cyclical natures, how at times the cycle is interrupted by a new sorrow. The lonely acacia, the tree of Tenere, once considered the most solitary tree in the world, stood alone in the Saharan desert, nothing near it for 250 miles. Somehow, a drunk driver came upon her. We are born into a mystery of cycles, a constant feedback loop. The remains of the tree of Tenere now live in a museum. Most of our ancestors lived in understood forests. The Amazon is being removed one football field at a time. American as apple pie. I understand that I have never been American. I could be born in the United States 1,000 times and still not be considered American. Every forest has its own tongue, each tree a unique murmur, I imagine the mountain hemlock listening to my mother on that blessed night. I may search for one particular tree, ask it to tell me the secrets of the time we spent together. As always, there's controversy. Experts do not agree. Some blame industrial logging, others blame the poor. Particular forests are like gods. See them reach towards the heavens. My mother was the kind of woman who was considered ornamental. She wouldn't hurt a fly, they would say, as a way of saying we can do whatever we want to her. What is enacted on the bodies of women and trees? Conquest and domination, stripped and cut up. The psyche of private and public property. The damage that surrounds the point of impact. If a tree is injured, it will show us its wound wood, proof of the process of compartmentalization and acceptance. Healing sometimes leaves the deepest scars. When considering environmental issues, it is imagined that nature is on some endless cycle of regeneration. Society hates women too. A hint of vengeance can be found in the way nature is probed with rational thought. The slash and burn and the dollar sign. A children's book named The Giving Tree. I want to tell every tree, you are more than a resource. The forest is a metropolis of myths, a place of undergrowth, networks, and regeneration. It is salvation and the purification of air. Of the 50,000 search and rescue missions that happen every year in the United States, 25% occur in Yosemite, the forest where my mother gave me to the trees. In Yosemite, between 1966 and 2005, 7 people were lost and found dead. 23 people were lost and not found. 11 people were found but remain unidentified. I have a place somewhere among these statistics. It's no surprise to me that witches ran away into the forest. The grand empathy of trees. The forest is a place of confusion and error and wandering for some. Meanwhile, the forest is a metaphorical state, the only home I've ever known. There are people who still exist in the forest. I am there right now, holding my mother's hand. I understand that next to a tree, I am not terminal, that all that matters are the aesthetics of detritus and roots, our beginnings and yearnings for entanglements. That Tubia rosea is the national tree of El Salvador. It is a pink tuft tree with winged seeds. In a forest, you may go astray. It is a place of otherness. I also thought that, so that is part of a larger piece that is part of a large project I'm working on right now. But I also brought Mothermorphosis and Dear Animal, and I thought I would read you some selections from both of those books. And then I'm gonna finish with a longer piece. Mothermorphosis opens with a timeline. "1930s. Ways to treat schizophrenia. Infect with malaria. Insulin-induced comas. Inducing convulsions with camphor injections. Lobotomy. Electroconvulsive therapy." 1932. Salvadorian peasant uprising begins. By the end, 30,000 people are dead. One woman survives La Matanza. 1947, my mother is born. 1955, 560,000 people are hospitalized in the United States for mental health issues. 1965, my birth. 1972, my mother's first hospitalization. 1981, Green Berets arrive in El Salvador as advisors. 1979 to 1981, 30,000 people are killed by army-backed right-wing death squads. 1982, my mother is interned at Napa State Hospital and receives electric shock therapy, among other treatments. Cut from the same cloth. I am my mother's negligee, pale and antiquated, like the fluff of her slippers. When I remember my mother, she is soft, like she wasn't towards the end. I picture her at the San Francisco Zoo in a mini dress and platforms, precarious. I held her hand in the lion's house, and Father wanted to stay to watch the feeding, and she could not. I held her hand tightly because if I held it tight enough, I thought I might become part of her, and then neither of us would have to be so alone. When my mother lost her mind for the 5th time, it was still early enough that we were counting. Her father called her blasphemy, beast, and possessed. It was the time of being a girl, then an armadillo, then the meat torn apart by the lions. As I was devoured, I asked politely, "Is this what becomes of the body?" I have never stopped searching for the clothed animal from which I came. We were living in the end times. It was in vogue to name a woman who you've hurt crazy or daughter. And I will read you one poem from Dear Animal, and then I'll move on to the closing piece. Wild. There are good bears and bad bears. I'm one of them. She-bear, a honey and potential man-eating mammalian. I forage because times are hard. I growl at all the wrong moments. It's the occasion of my needs and the food in your hands. We've all clawed at someone. Remind me of the year I became the unknown visitor. I'm still learning Eastern and Western time. Once, I was a dancing bear. Here are my teeth. What do you think? So I think that chapbooks have really come back into vogue, which I think is really exciting. And I was lucky enough to I had a residency at a lovely bookstore in San Francisco, and as part of the residency, they print a chapbook for you at the end of your residency. And so this little number is from that. And it's called A Brief History of the Selfie, and it is also a lyric essay. Much different tone. And it begins with an epigraph. Whenever I read this, I feel like I'm reading a bedtime story. And it kind of does have pictures in it, but not really pictures. You'll see. So the epigraph: I really believe there are things nobody would see if I didn't photograph them. Deanne Artis. The first selfie may have been a daguerreotype. The process was slow, as it is with most things that capture the soul. It was 1839, and Robert Cornelius was looking at himself. Once the image was printed, he wrote on the back, the first light picture ever taken. The selfie has been criticized. Excuse me, I skipped a page. The selfie has been criticized with the same fervor with which society criticizes young women. I love a selfie that speaks in tongues. It seems right that we should be our biggest fan and our own paparazzi. In 2012, selfie became a hashtag. Time magazine included hashtag selfie in its list of buzzwords that year. Lionel and I began exchanging selfies long before that year. The first selfies sent were of my feet, never bare. He sent selfies of his hands. We met in 1999. In 2013, the Oxford English Dictionary added selfie to its canon and called it the word of the year. Lionel and I have exchanged selfies at ridiculous rates, and then lulls occur. We eventually break these absences after accusing each other of being the one that stopped. There's a tenderness after each lull. Eminem took a selfie with the Mona Lisa. Albrecht Dürer painted his first selfie at the age of 13. Danny Trejo took a shirtless selfie on the DC State Capitol steps after he voted. Kim Kardashian West is a selfie fiend, a major contributor to the sexy selfie, criticized for her selfies with the fervor previously mentioned. In the jungle, Preston McCox found a nature camera and took selfies, the most stunning one of a female smiling directly at the viewer. The McCox took over 30 selfies in total. This act, of course, led to legal debate as to whom owned the image. The most controversial images in Western art history have been of female nudes. At the unveiling of Manet's Olympia, women fainted. Men beat the painting with their umbrellas. It could have been Olympia's brazen gaze. The artists of female nudes, almost always men. Male artists of the female nude are criticized, and yet their work is placed in the canon for eternity. Of the criticisms of her naked selfies, Kim Kardashian West said, "Enough is enough." The average lifespan of a person is 27,375 days. They say the average millennial is expected to take 25,700 selfies during their lifetime. There have been concerns about beauty and the ruin of lives and other human dilemmas. Is it narcissism or self-love? Never enough discussion about whose gaze. This isn't new. Everyone has something to say about what people want to say about themselves. The wide angle of most cell phones distorts the nose and the chin. I often wonder if a selfie is just another mirror. The mirror we know today was invented in 1835. It was also called a looking glass. Before the looking glass, we were still looking into still dark pools of water. There is a selfie of Lionel and me in a trailer in upstate New York. We look cold. We are wearing many layers of clothing. We are wearing matching plaid robes. We are standing in front of a heater. We look terrible. It was a beautiful day. Later the same day, we would take a walk. A pack of dogs would follow us and it would wake us from our hazy dream. A photographic journey is a hazy dream. Women take more selfies than men. Men are the most critical of the selfie. One reporter said about the selfie, "Is there anything more annoying?" Don West took a selfie with his blonde daughters, each of them holding soft-serve cones, after the verdict that made George Zimmerman a free man. He called the image #chilling. James Franco defended the selfie as a journalistic moment. Celebrities provide selfie tips. One for them and one for you. Communicate your feelings. Turn in a circle until you find the best light. No duck lips. A baby duck will imprint to an inanimate object if it is abandoned. To view Nan Goldin's selfies is to remember relationships will change you. A cosmopolitan study warns that if you are a couple who takes too many selfies, it's a warning sign. There are no studies on couples who send selfies to one another. As we exchange selfies, Lionel and I discuss aging, the parts of our bodies that we love and the parts that we hate. Sometimes he is in New York and sometimes Vienna. I like him better when he is in Vienna. In selfies, non-professional photographers show bias for the left cheek. Selfie is an acceptable word in Scrabble. Death by selfies include electrocution, falling from staircases and cliffs, shark attacks, car crashes, being hit by trains, and wounds inflicted by handguns. Of those who die from selfies, 75% are men. Time magazine says that the selfiest cities in the United States are Manhattan, Miami, and Anaheim. Lionel and I have exchanged selfies for 18 years. It is our language. Some say the selfie is dead. Love of the selfie is mercurial. Some say selfies have their own structural anatomy. Lionel and I suspect selfies have a life of their own. And it ends with an epigraph. A photograph is a secret about a secret. The more it tells you, the less you know. Deanne Arbus. Thank you so much.